I can't tell you how many hybrid shooters I've talked to, and when I ask them what is their dream camera, so many of them say the Fujifilm GFX 100 Mark II, and most of them have never used or even had that camera in their hands. And I was one of those people as well. Now, I've been fortunate enough that Fujifilm has loaned me this camera for the past 60 days. I have to send it back later this week. And you might be wondering, what is a $7,500 medium format camera doing on a channel about budget gear? Well, all the images you're gonna see in this video were shot on affordable medium format lenses or lenses adapted that will cover a medium format sensor. And some of them are as cheap as $300, and the most expensive one is around $1,000. And all of the lenses except for one are lenses that I already own and use on my full frame cameras and my crop sensor cameras. It just happens that these lenses also cover a medium format sensor. So if you like the images you see in this video, you might also be able to use one of these lenses on your crop sensor or full frame camera, and a list of the lenses will be in the description down below. And there were three lenses in particular that blew me away. A 100mm macro lens, it was about $300, and you'll see some images coming up on screen now. This is 5.6K full width sensor width video, downsampled video of this snail, and the detail coming out of this video is absolutely insane. And I found that true through even all of these cheap lenses. They still rendered an incredible amount of detail. The other one is an affordable cinema lens. I went to like this street protest thing, and I used a really long cine lens. This one is around $1,000. And while a 135mm cine lens is not the most common of cinema lenses, I wanted to go capture some interesting images at this protest. And in previous days, there was a lot of violent interaction between the police and the protesters. There was throwing of rocks, there was capsicum spray, they had the riot police out. It really got kind of crazy, and I kind of wanted to capture some of this and test the camera out, but I didn't want to get too close to the action. So that 135mm lens really allowed me to reach out and capture what I think are some really interesting images. And I also used an 80mm still lens, which is only around $600. And I'll just put that on the camera now so you can see that and just get that sensor covered up. I'm sure some of you are having some traumatic stress seeing that massive uncovered sensor, but this is another phenomenal lens. And I will put all the links to all these different lenses as well as other discount lenses that you can use on a medium format in the description down below. But the important thing to know is just because you are locked into a camera that costs almost $8,000 doesn't mean that you have to be locked into a minimum price of a lens of $3,000 or $4,000. There are a lot of more affordable options that can actually render 100 megapixels across a medium format sensor or 5.6K video. As a hybrid shooter, there's two headline features that I want to point out about this camera. The first is the 100 megapixel images. These are incredibly detailed images with a lot of room to crop, but an amazing amount of flexibility, plus you get these great Fujifilm camera colors right out of the camera, whether you shoot JPEG or RAW. Mostly I shot RAW and then just tweaked the RAWs, but the RAW image color is almost perfect right out of the camera. The other one is the 5.6K full sensor width downsampled video. Now, this has a little bit of a caveat to it. It's a 2.35:1 aspect ratio. That is a very common Hollywood aspect ratio, but it doesn't necessarily suit every situation. And it's the only one that gives you the full width of the sensor readout while being downsampled. So all of the images that you're going to see in this video were shot in that video mode. Now, the first thing I want to look at is the photo performance. Now, to start with, you're going to get Fujifilm color. So if you've shot any of Fujifilm's crop sensor cameras, you know they got all these film simulations. But if you shoot RAW, you also know right out of camera, you get these incredibly good RAW colors, which take very, very little to tweak and look kind of amazing. When we look at the JPEG options, you have all the new modern film simulations. Reala Ace is another one, the new one that is really, really popular. But you also have the standard picture profile, which is actually one of my favorites as well. And because it's a 100 megapixel image, you get an incredible ability to crop. Now, if you are a commercial photographer, or even if you're an amateur photographer and you're just taking pictures of things and kind of spraying and praying and just trying to find something that turns out, what you'll find is you can recompose the image in editing because you've got 100 megapixels to work with. And you'll see I took a photo with this budget 80mm and I was at a football game. And what you'll see is you can zoom in and the people and the players were so far away, but you actually get an incredible amount of detail once you zoom in. And this is detail that is rendered with a lens that costs $600. Once again, I'll put links in the description down below. Now, the other thing about this camera that I really liked in real world use is the auto white balance was excellent. Now, if you're somebody who just likes to go and run and gun photo and video, having accurate auto white balance is a huge help, and everything that you've seen, photo and video, has been shot in auto white balance mode. The other thing that really exceeded my expectations was the high ISO noise performance, and I just thought because it was a high megapixel camera that this would kind of be an issue, but even at high ISOs, it performed exceptionally well, and I think a big part of that is when you've got 100 megapixels, the noise is so fine that it just kind of looks fine. So I think that was a big part of it. I don't know if the camera's doing any processing the image or not, but I was able to shoot it at much higher ISOs than I thought I would be able to, and the images looked fine. Now, the other thing I will say, in photo mode, the autofocus performance was good without being great. It got the focus most of the time, as long as the subject wasn't moving too quickly. But when you compare it to like the top performing Sony lens, or even Fuji's APS-C sensor cameras like the XH2S, I think the autofocus performance is a little bit slower in this camera, which is not uncommon when it comes to medium format cameras. Now I'm going to jump into the video performance in a second, but before we get there, I want to talk about some of the things that we expect to see as sacrifices when using a medium format camera, and that is size, weight, and price. And when handling the Fujifilm GFX 102, it actually didn't feel dissimilar to some other cameras I've used. And then I went home and had a look at my Panasonic S1H, and I discovered they are both a very, very similar size and weight. In fact, the S1H is 1,165 grams, which is 2.57 pounds, and the GFX 102 is 1,030 grams, or 2.27 pounds. So the Fujifilm camera is actually lighter than my normal full-frame camera from Panasonic. Now, it's nowhere near as light as a camera like an A7 IV, and if we have a look at that camera, the Sony A7 IV is 659 grams, or 1.45 pounds, and that is not quite half the weight, but it's not far off. So you are going to notice a big difference if you're coming from one of these Sony hybrid cameras. The other nice thing about the GFX camera is it comes with a nice big grip, and I don't feel any need to extend the grip or make anything bigger, where if you look at my Sony camera, this camera I feel is a little bit too small for my hands, and so I add a little grip extension so that my pinky doesn't hang off the bottom. So while you do have a bigger camera body overall, for somebody like me, it's actually kind of the perfect size. Now, I just want to talk about the price of the lenses as well. So this is an area where you figure the GF lenses are going to be more expensive, but if we look at the GF 55mm lens, this is the GF 55mm f1.7, and kind of an equivalent, or not too distant equivalent to this lens, would be the Sony 55mm f1.2 G Master lens. And the Fuji lens is going to cost you $2,299, and the Sony lens is going to cost you $1,998. So you're only paying a couple $100 more for a medium format option. And when we look at the weight of those lenses, both the GF lens and the Sony G Master lens weigh the exact same thing, 1.7 pounds. Now, jumping into the video performance, the 5.6K full sensor width video in the 2.35:1 aspect ratio is my favorite video mode, and I think it is the outstanding feature of this camera. This gives you this medium format look, something that looks very similar to something out of an Arri Alexa, in a camera that is a hybrid camera that costs only a fraction of the price. And at this price point, this is the only camera that is going to give you this sort of image. In addition to that, it has F-Log2. Now, F-Log2 is a new format that's been introduced into a number of Fuji's new cameras, and it is one of my very favorite log formats. And when I compare it to something like my Panasonic V-Log, which is probably my other favorite format, the Panasonic V-Log, at times, that footage just comes out with a lot of detail, but also looking over-sharpened and maybe a little bit digital, which means I either have to soften it up in editing, use a vintage lens, or put a filter on it, where the Fujifilm F-Log2 footage comes out with this incredible amount of detail without looking over-sharpened and digital. So right out of camera, you just throw a LUT on. I just think it looks so very good. The other thing is they advertise a dynamic range of 14 stops. Now, what manufacturers advertise and what really is the real result is not always the same, but I did find there was an incredible amount of flexibility, and really there was almost no amount of over or underexposing that I couldn't recover within reason. The other thing is you have an incredible amount of color depth with 422 video, and I found I had a huge amount of flexibility with the color, but particularly all I needed to do in most situations, just get that exposure right and just tweak the overall saturation. And it was very, very easy to get the look I wanted using F-Log 2. But in addition to that, something that I think is really underrated on all of the Fujifilm cameras is that you can use the film simulations in the video modes. And my three favorites are the standard picture profile, the Eterna picture profile, and the Reala Ace picture profile. And I think the standard is just super punchy color if you just want something to publish right away for social media. The Eterna is something that looks like it's come out of your favorite Hollywood movie without applying any LUTs or editing. And the Reala Ace is kind of somewhere in the middle between those two. And these are great formats to use if you want a quick turnaround on your videos, or if you're just out shooting for fun or family or travel. If you're somebody who shoots video for a living, you probably don't want to come home and color grade your footage and use the F-Log 2. You might want to just get it straight out of camera and be done with it. And you are going to get some incredible footage just using that. You don't necessarily have to use the F-Log 2. Now, there are a few downsides to the video performance in the camera, and I should point those out. The first thing is the rolling shutter performance. And when you've got a 100 megapixel sensor using full width video and you're downsampling it, that is kind of expected. So it's just kind of par for the course. But be aware, if you're whipping the camera around, you are going to get a lot of rolling shutter. I don't shoot a lot of movement like that, so it wasn't a huge problem for me, but it definitely is a real thing. The other thing that I found using the IBIS for video was good without being perfect. There were times where I felt like there was just this slight little bit of judder in the footage. Now, I found that this was easily taken out in editing with a little bit of image stabilization, but I didn't think it was good as like my Panasonic cameras or even at times some of my Sony cameras. The other thing you should know is there are a huge range of video modes in this camera, and they all have different crop factors, and they don't necessarily tell you when you're in the menu and changing the settings whether that video footage is going to be downsampled or line skipped. So you might be shooting in one mode and you're getting this really incredible detailed images like you are with the 5.6K video, but you might swap into some other video mode and you won't have that same level of detail. And the only way I found out to figure out which ones are line skipped and which ones are downsampled are to research it online. And I kind of wish that they had that information in the menu system so I could make those decisions just with the back of the camera and not having to do any further research. And while I do think this is the ultimate hybrid camera for a lot of users and a lot of uses, there are some flaws in it that are just inherent in medium format cameras in general, which don't make it for everyone. And the first one is the autofocus speed. This is not going to be in line with the best full frame cameras out there, and it's not going to be usable for sports photography in general. The other thing is the rolling shutter performance in some of the video modes, depending on the type of video you're shooting, will also be a problem. Now, for that reason, most of the people that I know that own this camera don't own it as their only camera. They own it in combination with some other camera that makes up for those shortcomings. And the first one is the Fuji X-H2S. That is almost the opposite of this camera. It's an APC sensor camera. It has super fast sensor readout. It's got faster autofocus performance. So you could pair those two together and have matching colors, and each one would compensate for the other camera's shortcomings because the X-H2S is not a perfect camera either. The other one is you could pair this camera with one of the high-end Sony full-frame cameras, which have very fast autofocus, or they have that 12 megapixel sensor, which has got super fast readout for video. So I think for almost everyone, you could see this as a second camera that just takes to the next level that high resolution video or that 100 megapixel photo. But I think you probably do need that second camera to make up for the shortcomings of this camera, depending on what you do. Now, if you're on the hunt for your next camera, I've just thrown a video on screen now. These are the cameras that I recommend, the best cameras at every price point. So regardless of where your budget is, all the way down to $300 and up to $8,000, I probably got you covered in that video.